Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media for HAR, and I am joined again by some familiar faces. They joined us just about a year ago on this program, and it is time for an update. So we are joined this morning with HAR Strategic Architect Jeremy Conaway and HAR Consultant Jim Sherry. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know that we're all in different time zones this morning, which is which is kind of fun. But I appreciate your time this morning because as we all know, there have been a lot of headlines, a lot of things that could be concerning to anybody that is interested in real estate that we're going to be discussing today. And what I'm really excited about is that you both have some tips and ideas planned for members. What should we be focusing on right now, and what is going to ensure some long-term success? So I look forward to hearing that from you both. Before we get into that, though, for anyone who hasn't seen you on our program before, I'd love to do just some brief introductions, if you could, and we can start with you on this, Jeremy.
Well, my name is Jeremy Conaway, and as Christine said, I'm the strategic architect for the Houston Association. I would like to add something that yes, we have some tips, but Jim and I very carefully will never tell you what to do. We're simply saying we're standing here on the shore watching this storm, and it seems to us that you might consider doing these things, but don't ever take these as a fact that we're with you all the way. We're learning it every day.
Very good. Jim?
Yeah, my name is Jim Sherry. I've been associated with HAR for over 30 years in various capacities, vendor, presenter, consultant. Enjoyed every one of them, and I'm glad to be here this morning.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you both. So let's just jump right into it. And I want to start with the economy. We all know there's a lot of concern around the economy right now. Jim, what economic issues do you see directly impacting the real estate industry?
Well, I have several I want to talk about. The first one is inflation. And a little description about inflation is quite simply too many dollars chasing too few goods. So when you flood the economy with money, which we've done as stimulus after the pandemic or during the pandemic, we've started the whole ball rolling for inflation. Inflation is, you may think of it as gas prices and food, but it's really everything you buy has some component of fuel. So the other thing I want to do is, just before we leave inflation, is talk about there's two kinds of inflation, push and pull. Push inflation is what's occurring right now, which is prices are going up because supply is low, because stop producing as much oil, so on and so forth. Pull inflation is when consumers start to think things are getting so bad, I need to buy now because prices are going to go up. So we're kind of on the cusp between push and pull inflation, but we're going to have inflation with us for quite some time. The next thing I'd like to deal with is recession. A recession really is 2 quarters of decreasing gross domestic product. Gross domestic product means all the goods and services produced by our economy are measured, and then we track that on whether the economy is static, whether it's getting better, whether it's getting worse. We had the first quarter a decrease in GDP. Second quarter ended in June. We don't have that data right now, but all the economists I read are predicting that we are in a recession, and a recession really is a slowing down of the economy, inflation, rising prices, so on and so forth. The other factor we have in the economy is interest rates. Interest rates, as you know, went from 2.5 to almost 6. Now we had a slight decrease to 5.5 just recently, but the Fed has now agreed that in July they're going to raise it another 0.75%. So that could drive our interest rates over 7, certainly not quite 8, but over 7, in order to slow down the economy. The idea is the higher the interest rate, you can stop a lot of borrowing, you can stop a lot of expansion, and therefore you're controlling inflation. So that's kind of the throttle is interest rates. I think we should really talk about in the economy, housing shortage. We have a shortage of housing and shelter in general. There's no bubble out there. We're not going to see a big decrease like we did in 2008, because the 2008 bubble was because we loaned money. We did adjustable rate mortgages. We loaned money to people who could only afford the first year payment. The second year payment went up and they couldn't afford it. Inflation started, so on and so forth. So we have a housing shortage. The shortage is really brought about increased demand, increased population. The younger people wanted to start buying homes. They sort of got through college and paid some of their debt back, and they said, okay, I want a house. So we have increased demand, but we have a shortage in housing for several reasons. One is the demand is higher than the supply, and builders are not building as many houses. They're afraid as they build that they may get caught with more inventory than they can afford to carry. So we have a housing shortage to look at. There's no end in sight for inflation. It's going to continue. We have increase in fuel, and I just want to take a minute and say it's underrated what oil and fuel, because trucks and buses and ships and trains and tractors all need fuel. And when fuel prices rise as they have, those prices are passed along to us in every single good and service we have. So I would say that there's no end in sight. Inflation is going to go up. Interest rates are going to go up. Generally, the economy is slowing down. So it's kind of a cataclysmic event here where we have a recession and inflation, and we don't have a short-term fix. So that's not a bright look, but it is a truthful look at the economy.
Well, and I appreciate that. And we wanted to discuss that right out of the gate because we know that it is a major concern for all of us, even those that are not within the real estate industry. And I do want to note that we're going to dive even deeper into the economy next week. I'll go ahead and let everyone know now that we are going to have Patrick Jankowski. He's the Senior VP of Research for the Greater Houston Partnership. He will be on with us next Monday as well. So be sure to tune in for that, and we will dive very deep into the economy with him. Jeremy, let's change gears a little bit here with you. What industry shifts have you witnessed over the last few months, and how do you believe they're impacting the industry and our members?
So let me just back a little bit off of that,
Okay.
because a lot of people, when we start having this conversation, sort of float back and say, "Oh, well, Sears did it in '83," and it's not something we do well looking at what's happening right now. So it's important to start this discussion with the fact that the major events that have changed and are now changing this industry undertook, made their appearance several years ago. We've been talking about this for a fair amount of time, and what's happened is that speed is just slowly built up, and the number of changes and the number of factors, economic, philosophical, legal, government, regulatory, all kinds of things, is simply gained speed. And so today it sounds like we're saying, chicken little, but the fact is this is quite a natural place for us to be following the last 7 years of change. So yes, if we were looking at, we can identify for the first time, where I guess in the past we might have 3 or 4 things we were tracking for the entire year, and now we have dozens of things that we're tracking every day. And that's one of the things that Jim and I do, working with CEO Bob Hale, is that we monitor over 30 different publications. Bob maintains dozens of relationships, and Jim and I with industry critical decision makers. It takes a lot of time and energy now to stay on top of all these. So let's go back to a sort of a middle position and say, well, what about the last 6 months? And then we can work our way into the things. So if you look at what happened starting last year, is that the rental market, people say, has exploded, but the rental market has gone from a very de minimis position to a major position. So we now realize that an entire generation of people may not be able to afford their American dream. And so that's a relatively new situation, because it's just a matter of wait around and you'll get a house that'll be great. But the rental market is also influenced by the fact that some 40% of sales last year took place with what we call industrial or investors, people who didn't buy a home to live in, they bought a home to rent. And that's both feeding this growing rental market, but also it's changing it significantly. So the rental market is a major change. The impact of working from home. Those of you who are listening who've done that, although if you're listening to this, you probably have been working from home for a long time, as realtors do. But the fact is, all of America has changed because of working from home, every aspect of your life. And it's easy to say, oh, wow, yes, we work from home, but you got to watch the idea of deminimizing the changes which are occurring, because they are significant. So you have the role of people who are not driving anymore. If you've tried to buy a suit or a belt lately, they aren't there because people aren't buying them anymore. People haven't bought new clothes in ages. That changes how people's thinking. This role of investors. I mean, you have communities, school boards, all kinds of people who used to invest in other things are now investing in American residential property. We don't know if they're going to hold it or not. But what we do know, and what we've begun to learn in the last 90 days, is that by and large, residential property managed by institutions is significantly different, or provides a significantly different tenant experience than those provided by the classic, I've had some extra money, so I bought a rental fixer-upper. It's becoming a tenant now is a much different experience, and probably not as good as one might have expected. The role of our agents is changing significantly. The expectation, the consumers have been, over the last 6 months anyway, have been through a horrible experience. Now, we called it a hot market because deep down we went, whoa, this is really great. Well, that's great if you're inside, but if you're an outsider, the last 6 months have been horrifying. People report having been rejected time after time after time with offers, and that's upsetting. Buying a home for most American consumers is not a fun experience to begin with. When you add rejection to that, it gets worse. So the consumer role has changed, and the consumer attitude has changed, and I think most of all, the consumer sense of realtors has changed. I'm not saying that consumers are blaming realtors for what has happened over the past 6 or 7 months, but they're certainly aware that realtors have a role in that, and they're not exactly sure if that's a positive or a negative role. So we're beginning to see some of that. We've got new brokerage business models, and we've had something called iBuying now since 2017. Now, it seems just like yesterday. But even within iBuying, the iBuying business models have changed. And every time something changes like that, affects everyone in the marketplace. And so that's another issue that has changed. Affordability is an issue that we used to, for years, we had a homeowners rate of 69%. Geez, for 20 or 30 years, it was right in that. It's now dropped closer to 60%. That changes all of our lives, and the lives of not only what we do for a living, and the factors that mean affordability. Nobody ever said that the cost of propane would impact who could have a house, who couldn't afford a house. So we're seeing a lot of changes in that. So across the board, everything seems to be unstable. Now, it's not really. Again, if you go back and realize that much of the things that are happening had their origins, upwards to 7 or 8 years ago, but they're all coming up to speed now, all impacting everyone who's in the economy or in the real estate economy. So it seems like everything is upside down.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much. We had a comment come in from Leslie. That's a great outlook on why the market is what it is now. No room for the independent home buyers or business owners. So we can discuss that a little bit more too. I want to talk about the market, the real estate market, and I want to shift this over to Jim. So, Jim, what are your thoughts on the current market conditions, and what can realtors be doing right now or start focusing on right now to ensure success when and if there is a turn?
The question is really interesting. The factors that are affecting the market, a number of them Jeremy mentioned, but for those of you who are practitioners, it's like solving a simultaneous equation. It's lots and lots of things are in motion, and there's one output, and that output is what's occurring. So you have interest is one of them, housing shortage is one, fewer transactions is one, lower commissions is one, new business models is another one. When you look at solving that equation and saying what's that all going to mean, that's almost a daily compilation. Jeremy talked about these things started 7 years ago. We've been tracking things for years and years, and you kind of knew where it was going, but it's very hard to convince people in our industry that these changes are going to manifest when they start to occur at the same time. The iBuyer, the interest rate, shortage of homes. Now I want to talk a little bit about public corporations versus private corporations. We see real estate has a number of public corporations. We get to see what they're doing in terms of the market. They're cutting back on staff, they're cutting back on expenses, but we don't get to see the same thing going on in more traditional real estate firms. So we see it in public because the public corporations have to disclose to the SEC what they're doing in their corporation. The private corporations don't have to disclose it, but I would say most every broker, most every agent is starting to look around and say, okay, with these changes, how is that going to affect me? I want to talk some about the rental nation. Jeremy touched on it. The stats right now that just came out is 18% across the nation. 18% of homes that were bought in the last quarter were bought by investors, not somebody who's going to live in the house. Houston's number is only over 30% of the homes in the last quarter were bought by investors. So what does that mean to you as a practitioner in the marketplace? Well, if a large percentage of the homes are going into the rental market and they're being bought by institutions, that's one sale that gets made between a builder and an investor. There's no realtors in that process. So what happens to the realtors is they don't get to sell those homes. So if 30% of Houston's homes became investor owned, that was 30% that did not go to the MLS. Where do they go? They're going to go in rental markets. And our industry has not served the rental market because we don't see it as vital. However, now, as Jeremy pointed out, the renters are a big segment of our population. Rental rates have gone up 25% in the last 3 months. So right now, in some parts of the country, we're seeing bidding on rentals like we saw bidding on buying a home. So people are going and saying, well, you're asking $2,000 for that. I'll give you $2,500. Somebody says, I'll give you $26,000. We're seeing rental rates escalating very rapidly. And most real estate firms don't see themselves as heavily invested in the rental market, but maybe they should consider that. So that's one of the things I want to talk about. I don't see any let up. The federal government speculated that we are 10 years out from satisfying the housing shortage. It's going to take 10 years to build enough homes, create enough apartments for the housing. However, inflation and rising prices are stopping the builders from building speculation homes. So you don't have builders building spec homes. You have builders right now that said, I'm not going to sign a contract now for delivery next June because I can't control how much it's going to cost. So I just go ahead and build a few homes and I'll price them when I get there. The other thing we're seeing in the market in terms of change, back on the market. I've been tracking back on the market. So people that signed a contract when the interest rate was 2.5 have to take another look at whether they can afford that home with an interest rate that's 5 or 6. So back on the market is something we're watching right now and see how many of those people just walk away. Now, if you bought from a builder, the builder's okay with that because the builder's going to sell the house for more money than your contract was. But those are changes that are occurring in the market. Those are not small changes, and they're very hard to see the end result of it all, because as Jeremy pointed out, we're living the end result, and it's day-to-day business. So that's a big look at the effects in the market.
Absolutely. We had a question come in really quick from Basil. Hello, I have a question about rentals. Since investors were major buyers in the pandemic era, isn't that supposed to drive rent down? More units would be available for rent. What are your thoughts there?
Well,
Well, go ahead, Jim.
that is satisfying a need for rentals. People are not afraid or are not able to buy the house. So the investors are pushing those rental rates higher and higher, because if the people can't buy a home and they need a place to live, they're going to pay a higher rent. So I don't think that's going to drive the price down. I think that has a tendency to stabilize the prices and drive them up.
Okay.
Jeremy, what's your
Yeah, Christine, I wanted also to mention something else it's a kind of a family thing, so it's difficult to talk about. For years, most people in the industry really didn't know what was happening within the companies. You just didn't. It's sort of like the dairy farmers always keep a good music going, and everyone will produce just fine. But one of the things we've seen, certainly over the last several months, is an increased publicity of the difficulties that we're having. So in the last 30 days, we've had one of our major firms announce a transition in executive employees, and everyone said, "Didn't they just do that?" Yeah, they did just do that. We had somebody else, a major company, who spent a year or 2 years telling us about how magnificent their new technology program was, and last week they announced they were shutting that whole program, shutting that program down. We get to see, for lots of reasons, but we're getting to see the inside track in more and more brokerages and businesses, and that adds to the anxiety, because it's just a death in the family, if you will, and so there's a lot more people conscious about the fact that there's this wobbling effect, and that lots of people are laying people off. Have you ever heard of a real estate brokerage laying people off? So that is also, I think, impacting our overall attitude. We're less secure about what's going on in our industry.
well? Let me, if I could add there, the fastest growing company right now is EXP. EXP has a business model, has a very low overhead. They don't have 100 offices in a state. They have a broker, and they have agents that fundamentally work from either home or a small office that's their own office. So there's a model that wasn't even around in the last 5 years, but it's grown now to a point where it's the fastest growing. And in the Houston market, it's the largest producer in the Houston market in a very short period of time. And you have to look at that and say, there's a position for the future, because they didn't start out with overhead like 100 offices. Very look at the market.
So just a couple follow-up questions that we had here that I wanted to get to. Basma asked, so do you believe we're still considered to be in a seller's market right now?
For those people who have a house to sell, yes, it's a seller's market in a sense that there's a shortage. But the affordability index is starting to dampen our ability to raise those prices. And so all the predictions were that the prices would continue to rise. But the predictions now, and revised in the last couple of months, are we don't have a significant price decrease in the market, but we have a slowing of the increase in the market. And so I would suspect it's still a seller's market, but it's not the hot market that Jeremy talked about 6 months ago or a year ago. And I've seen some price reductions that are $30,000 and $40,000 price reductions in that higher end market.
Okay. And another question.
Last week,
I'm sorry, go
just
ahead.
to follow up. Just to follow up on that. So last week we reported that nationally over 25% of leads of listings have had their listing price reduced over the past month. I mean, that's a huge, from this meteoric rise to suddenly 25% of people decided that, well, maybe we had to cut back and sell it cheaper.
Okay. LaDonna had a question, just going back really quickly to rentals that we were mentioning are very important for realtors to be paying attention to. LaDonna asked, will rents eventually reset and go back down?
I no,
You get the good ones, Jim.
Look into your crystal ball, Jim.
Yeah, right.
not until supply is plentiful. I don't see rentals decreasing because there's not enough of them now. So why would I, if I was an individual renting, why would if I'm a corporation that owns 130 subdivision, I have no incentive. If they're fully rented, I have no incentive to lower the price. So I don't see any indication that's going to happen.
Okay.
So another thing along the same lines is keep in mind that with a much more sophisticated landlord or owner, in effect, these are folks who have the money to track on a micro basis what's happening with rents. So where if you rented a home from a doctor's wife who did a couple of extra surgeries one year and off they weren't tracking. They just thought they were making their payment. Everything is good. Today, you've got landlords who on a daily basis are tracking what's happening to rents and is there a space? Can they lift those rents? Because that's their job, is to maximize return on investment. So that alone is going to probably cause more increase than decrease in the rental market.
Okay, very good. I'm gonna. The next question is gonna go to Jeremy, and if I could, just for a second, Jim, we did get a report that your audio is a little crackly. There's a little bit of static, and it's kind of cutting in and out. So while Jeremy's answering the next question, if you want to take a look at your audio settings for us really quick, that would be extremely helpful.
Now, Jim, not out the window.
Yes. So, so Jeremy, let's talk. Let's shift gears again here. Let's talk about some of the major lawsuits within our industry. So, what's the status on some of those major lawsuits, and which do you believe are the most important, maybe, for our members to keep a close eye on?
Well, again, we have always had litigation as a player in our industry. Our customers have always been litigious. Our relationships have been litigious. Agents suing, brokers suing. So we're not changing that. But what's happening now is that because of the sophistication of what's happening in the marketplace, the nature of the lawsuits and the causes of action that are being raised are much more serious. So obviously, but in my mind, surely the most exciting area of litigation is in the area of compensation. And there are a number of Aurora and Sandisk and a number of other lawsuits where people have sued alleging that there's an inappropriate formula. The biggest one being, well, gee, I signed up for Agent X to sell my home. I discovered that I'm also paying the buyer's agent, and nobody ever told me about that. And so the first couple of suits like that were filed, the court just sort of said, nah, that's no big deal. But then a couple of lawsuits went a little deeper into the issue and established a reasonably good case about fraud and misrepresentation. And there are now a number of lawsuits, major lawsuits in the works that are on that issue. Now, again, talking about lawsuits is sort of like going to the horse track. I mean, it's like everybody has a winner, everybody has a loser. However, for the first time, and a couple of weeks ago, some of the experts in the industry begin to opine that these new agent how we get paid lawsuits may have a potential payout of $144 billion because they cover almost every transaction and they go back several years. So it's we're used to hearing about big dollars in the media, but nobody has $144 billion in our industry. So yes, there is for the first time one or more lawsuits out there that would have the potential of essentially bankrupting the industry. Now again, don't we're not saying that's the case. These are lawsuits. Lawsuits are like gambling. I mean, it's a matter of, can you get a group of attorneys who are willing to invest several $1 million into a big return, and if you can find it, you file a case. It doesn't make the case correct. It just makes it there, and once it's there, it's just sort of it's sort of like iceberg out in the middle of the ocean. You can watch it, you can talk about it, and you just hoping like hell that it doesn't drift into your path. And it looks increasingly right now that some of these lawsuits, especially the ones about commissions, are going to drift into some people's world. What happens is more than you ever needed to know, but the early part of a lawsuit is called motion practice. It's all the little teeny cleanup issues. And great lawyers know that cases can be won or lost on that. So the recent one you heard about in our industry is all about a class, designating a class. And that means, can someone come in and say, I represent all the people who bought a home over the past 5 years? Courts are reticent to do that, but on the other hand, courts are reticent to support with their limited resources thousands of cases on the same issue. So we're seeing that shift occurring right now, and we're not sure where that's going to be. But again, number one, these are lawsuits. Time is when the attorneys plunk down the $1 million and say, all right, we'll support this lawsuit. They understand it's going to take years. This is not something that's going to pop up like, something, that's going to take years for these cases to go through the process. But for the first time, we just need to be present that as we look at the horizon of our industry, there are some major potentials out there arising out of lawsuits.
Okay. Thank you. So, Jim, I want to turn it back to you because we've mentioned several factors, different things that are impacting the industry right now. Is there anything else, any other factors taking place right now that our members should be paying attention to?
I think we've covered the waterfront. The one thing that I guess I would do if I were an agent today is I would take a hard look at the industry and say, where are we now and where are we going to go? What's our future look like? I think it's going to be a more demanding consumer, more transparency in the transaction. I think that we'll see more competition in the market than we had before. I mean, right now we see mortgage getting into the real estate business and mortgage owning title and title buying real estate. I mean, we're starting to see kind of a alphabet soup out there in terms of the models and the kind of companies, and everybody's focused on the amount of money that is commissioned in the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in real estate commission per year, and that's a big focus. And so that's one of the things that Jeremy's legal is talking about. There's a lot of money in the real estate business. So if I were to look out there as an agent, I would say, I better get to know rentals. I better be in a position to be able to talk to my consumer about affordability and whether they're buying right now is the right decision or not the right decision. Somehow the consumers need advice, and mostly our advice has been to buy. I'm not sure right now that you would advise somebody to buy a high-end house at 8 or 9%. So I think that the factors that are coming up are, it's more important to know what's coming, to know what's going on in the industry. And that's very, very hard to do because it's so large and there's so many things occurring.
Okay. So I wanted to ask of both of you maybe 2 to 3 things that all members from the management level to some of the newest agents that have just joined, what should everyone be doing right now to ensure long-term success? Now, Jim, you just mentioned get to know rentals, and you mentioned understanding affordability. Is there anything else that you would add to that list? And then we'll get to you next, Jeremy.
I think watching consumer behavior. We don't do a good job in the industry to really understand that the consumers really do play a role. I mean, Jeremy pointed out, there was a time for the last 50 years that I remember, buying a house was a goal that everybody had. I'm not sure that the consumers feel the same way at this point. Analysis in the last couple of weeks that showed that rental was more affordable than purchase. So is that true or not true? So as an agent, you really need to understand what the consumers are going to ask you about and be able to give them good advice. And I think more and more they're going to rely on you to be an advisor as opposed to just a salesperson.
Okay, very good. Jeremy?
I've got a number of things I think that we ought to, address.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it's, and I guess this probably is a personal peeve of mine, is that I talk to people all over the country, and you get into a meeting and somebody in the back stands up and says, this is no big deal. We've been doing this. We've seen this 1,000 times. No, you haven't. Okay, let's get this straight. I don't care how long you've been a realtor. You have not been in this situation before, and you don't have a bunch of solutions that are going to come flying out of your back pocket. So you got to start with this idea. This is serious business. You got to get engaged in this process. It's not just going to go away and have some little. It's a big deal, and it's going to have a big issue. You need to commit some time to learning about this. And again, something that many realtors don't want to do, but you need to learn about it, because it's going to keep in mind that for every threat that we're talking about, there's 2 opportunities. And so don't worry about the threat, but you say to yourself, okay, what opportunity is this going to create? And that's where the money making is going to happen, is that people who take the time to go, wow, if this was the case, why wouldn't I do this? Again, when you get into a conversation and someone is telling you about how we used to do it, just walk away. I mean, really, you don't waste your time talking about how we used to do it, because it's not relevant to you. Don't try to compare it. It's a new day. And by the way, it's a bright day. And you look at the new people who are coming into our industry in HAR, at the YPN program, and we've got really sharp people with great ideas and great energy. So you want to be part of that. You want to be part of them. And so you may find a higher need to associate. And that's, of course, what HAR is all about, is associating in the benefits. So in this particular case, you have over 40,000 people just in our community alone who ought to be discovering the way to deliver a more positive consumer experience, not necessarily the way to keep doing what they've always done. So bottom line here is that everyone who's listening to this will go through a change over the next 12 to 18 months. The issue is whether or not you elect what change you want to go through, or you let someone else elect what change you're going to go through. But this is a good time to get engaged in the process and have this be your golden opportunity.
Excellent.
Yes,
Jim.
It appears to me that the newer people in the business are more prepared to accept the new market than the older people in the business. And I can say that I'm an older person. So I think the issue that we have is that the newer you are in the business, the less likely you are to stumble over the way we used to do it. And also, a lot of the people coming in the business are very technically aware. And so they use tools, and they use the kind of things that are provided to them electronically to deliver a better consumer experience. And so I agree with Jeremy. I think there's opportunity out there. I think there's going to be a squeeze in the market, because there's a squeeze in commission and a squeeze in a number of transactions. But the better people are still going to do it very, very well.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question because I see it a lot on social media, and that is, what is HAR doing to help our members through all of these shifts? We mentioned so many things today, the economy, the changing market, changing landscape within the industry. So many things were mentioned. So what is HAR doing to help its members through these shifts? And we started with Jim on the last one, so we'll start with Jeremy on this one.
Well, as it should be, really. I mean, so I want to toot the horn. I'm always astounded, and I work with organizations throughout the industry, and I'm always astounded of how few people understand what an incredible pearl HAR is. But let's just cover a few of the things. So first of all, you have a CEO and president named Bob Hale, who is recognized not in the spectator booth. He's recognized on the track, if you will, and he's one of the great performers and is always recognized as one of the top 25 most powerful people in the world in our industry. That's really a big deal when you're going through this, to have a leader who understands this is someone who can pick up the phone, call virtually anyone, and get answers. So our system at HAR gets the beginning answers months before most people even understand that there's a problem. We have under Bob's leadership an amazing research program. It's Jim, it's it's Bob, it's Matt. It's a whole group of people who spend their time tracking what's happening in the industry, and more importantly, seeing how does that impact the Houston market. So there's a prize there that most realtors nowhere else in the country are able to have. We have critical relationships with industry executives and decision makers who regularly come into Houston and present to our members and follow when that's going on. And it's invaluable information. It's information that most people don't have. Our organization has a level of innovation and creativity within the organization. Uh, you're aware of our recent management tools that's been was put out, which now is actually, I forget what the percentages are. A significant percentage of our members are using that showing tool, that's something that no one else does. We have a communications program that gets information out there. So it's a part of what I think Jim and I want to sort of scream out there, and that is track what your association is doing. It's amazing, and no one else is doing it at this level. And so we can save you a lot of pain. There's a lot of, whenever you have an industry discussion, people are talking about consumer pain points. Let's talk about agent and broker pain points. HR has a number of programs that are designed to help our members get through these experiences with a minimum level of pain. And I think that's so keeping in mind what is emerging today will, to a great extent, form the basis of your future and professional lives moving forward. So there's no reason why to begin to invest a few hours a week in tracking these things so you don't get surprised.
Okay, excellent. Just a couple comments that came in. Katina said, "This is an amazing live. Jim and Jeremy should do a weekly podcast." So there you go, Jim and Jeremy. You have a podcasting future ahead of you.
We're actually working in Vegas right now. We don't have time.
And then to follow up on that, though, in all seriousness, we are going to be HAR is hosting a webinar, Redefining Risk for Today's Brokerages, on July 20th that Jim and Jeremy will be speaking on. So the link is in the chat if you are interested in signing up for that. That's going to be an excellent session. A question here, going back to rentals really quick. Will rentals get to the point of being higher than the cost of a mortgage?
It's a tough one because it depends on the price of the house. You can't generalize it. Right now, people are renting because they can't buy. Because the American dream is to own a house, and that's also where people make the most money they ever make in their life, is the equity to build up in their house. So they want it, they'd like to be there. Let me give you a little scenario. If you're in a home and you're renting a home in a rental community and you're paying $3,500 or $2,500 a month, do you really have the ability to save up the money for a down payment when that's occurring? Or do you really just look at your lifestyle and go, we're just going to continue to rent? That's a big challenge. So right now, it's very hard to tell whether renting or buying is economically, on a month-to-month basis, one is better than the other. Long term, of course, ownership is going to be better, but ownership is slipping away from a lot of people in America, and I think we need to take a position there and really get to a point where we point out to people the value of home ownership in the long term. That's not an answer to your question, but that's my speech, right? That's the best I have. It's it's vexing because in the past we could ownership was better, but right now, best based on the cost and the rising cost of houses, it gets it's pretty equal.
That
Okay.
argument,
Go ahead, Jeremy.
that argument's been around a long time, and I'm listening to Jim reiterate that again, and realize we live in a world in which we have people making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, young people, and it's and so there's a sense of it that, well, maybe what Jim said is going to change, and there'll be some other way to make money. And we could say, well, they could buy stocks and bonds, for instance, and well, how's that doing this week? Jim is right. I mean, you at some point you have to come to grips with the fact that year after year, decade after decade, investments in American residential housing have been a good thing. And by the way, if you watch how much money is coming into our country from offshore, there's a lot of people with a lot of money who still believe that American residential real estate is the prime investment in the entire world. So I think you know, Jim might start out sounding like your dad, but in the end, he should sound like your economist. He is absolutely correct and very wise, and there is nothing on the horizon right now that suggests that something's going to come along that makes a better investment than real estate. There's nothing. There's no second place.
Very good. Jim, I didn't want to leave you out of that last question, though, if you had anything else to add about what HAR is doing to help our members through these shifts. Jeremy mentioned quite a few things, but if you have something to add, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I wanted to reiterate. HAR is spending a lot of money keeping up with the market, keeping up with what's going on, and then communicating that, whether it's in our new affordability index that come out, or it's in the change in classes, the change in speakers that we bring in. Like Showing Smart was a good example where we looked and said, what's the pain point in the marketplace? Can we do? Every time we look at new products and services, we're trying to determine what the realtors are spending money on and what are their needs, what are their pinch points, and what can we do. And there's a concentrated effort within HAR to do what's best for the members. And so that's why Jeremy and I stick around here, because it's one of the few realtor organizations that is 100% member directed. So we're that's my last comment to the audience is keep up with what's going on so you can be knowledgeable and valuable. I'll go back to something Jeremy pushed a couple years ago. Know your value proposition. Know what your value proposition when you talk to people. And part of your value proposition is being able to inform the people what's occurring in the market and what your advice is. That's my advice.
Very
Worst
good.
advice is what I gave you some.
You mentioned the Housing Affordability Index that we recently released for the first time. We also should mention that we are planning to launch the Rental Affordability Index. So both of those reports, the Housing Affordability Index and the Rental Affordability Index, are going to be quarterly reports that HR is going to be putting out. So be on the lookout for that towards the end of the quarter. I did see a question about unemployment or employment in that market. Connie, I would encourage you to tune in next week as we're going to have Patrick Jankowski, the Senior VP of Research for the Greater Houston Partnership on. We're going to discuss all of that and more with him. Jim and Jeremy, you've both shared a ton of great information this morning. We truly appreciate your time. I would like to give you just one last round. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our members today?
Yes. This organization has a century-long tradition of supporting its members in times of crisis and opportunity. And just this is another one of those opportunities. And it's not a question of whether or not HR will rise to the occasion. They already are. The real issue is, will HR's members understand the contribution that HR can make? And so get engaged, get involved. It's an amazing organization.
Thank you, Jeremy. Jim?
No, I've said it all. I really have. Stay informed and become an expert. That's what the public needs from us.
Very good. Well, thank you both again for your time today. As I just mentioned a moment ago, please tune in next week for next week's Member Focus Monday. We will be joined by Patrick Jankowski to discuss the economy, employment rates, and we're going to be discussing both local and national numbers. So we'll see you next Monday at 9 a.m. with Patrick Jankowski. Again, Jim, Jeremy, thank you again for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you. Have a good one.
Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.